Hello, and thank you for joining us again at Voice of Rohingya Radio. We are a registered nonprofit coming to you from the state of Oregon in the United States of America. I would like to take some time to thank all of our listeners. Every week, your numbers are growing beyond our greatest hopes, and every new listener is an inspiration for this program to continue to provide the latest news through our exclusive interviews, reports from inside the border, and reputable sources from around the world. If you would like to stay up to date with our program, you can find all of our broadcasts online at youtube.com/VOR radio, or you can join our Facebook page to find information on past and future programs. It is April 27th, 2014. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, I am your host, Zach Taylor. Our first story today is the Center for Ethics, Peace, and Global Affairs of the School of International Studies at the American University in Washington's event, U.S.-Burma Relation and the Plight of the Rohingya on Thursday. The event was presided by Dr. Jeff Bachman, Director of the Center for Ethics, Peace, and Global Affairs. Panelists included the Director General of the Arakan Rohingya Union, the Executive Director of U.S. Campaign for Burma, Daniel Sullivan of United to End Genocide, and Benjamin Zawacki, Visiting Fellow at Harvard University Human Rights Program. Members of the Burmese Rohingya refugee community also gave first-hand accounts of their arduous journey to safety at the event after escaping violence perpetrated by Buddhist Rakhine mobs and Burmese armed forces. Mr. Zawacki spoke on how the indigenous Rohingya people of Arakan were made stateless through systematic and institutionalized discrimination and became victims at the hands of the human smugglers and traffickers. Jennifer Quigley spoke on the revocation of Rohingya citizenship and deprivation of basic human rights during the reign of Director Ne Win, leading to the 1982 law which stripped the Rohingya of their citizenship. Ms. Quigley further described how the post-military regime government further intensified its discriminatory policy against the Rohingya ethnic minority. Daniel Sullivan provided extensive coverage on his work on prevention of genocide. He provided accounts of what he and Congressman Tom Andrews witnessed in Arakan during their recent trip to Burma. Mr. Sullivan stated that among all of their travels to different parts of the world, the warning signs of genocide were most prevalent in Burma. He also provided compelling evidence of dehumanization of Rohingya by monk Warathu and other radical Buddhists through hate speeches and the distribution of hate literature, flyers, CDs, and DVDs. Mr. Sullivan also explained the well-orchestrated scheme of eliminating witnesses, such as non-governmental humanitarian organizations, to the atrocities and violence in Arakan by the Burmese government. I was able to learn more about the meeting after conducting an interview with the executive director of the U.S. Campaign for Burma, Jennifer Quigley, in D.C. yesterday with me at Voice of Rohingya Studio. Ms. Quigley, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. Could you tell me how you got involved in the Rohingya issue and about your work on the U.S. Campaign for Burma?
I would have to say that about 10 years ago, I got involved when I was working on the Thai-Burma border, and I learned about some cases of Rohingya women being raped by members of the Burmese military. And so I'd been working with a local organization at the time to raise awareness about the sexual violence that women from Burma suffer at the hands of the Burmese military.
And what kind of organizations have you had to collaborate with in working on the Rohingya plight?
Since I joined the U.S. Campaign for Burma 7 years ago after my time on the Thai-Burma border, we work with many different organizations. And so that would be, human rights organizations globally, working, with policymakers around the world, particularly here in the U.S. Or at the United Nations. We work with organizations inside Burma, whether they be political parties or human rights organizations or environmental organizations, those that focus specifically, say, on political prisoners. And so just sort of anybody that could be helpful in trying to address the serious issues that the communities face.
I've just mentioned your recent conference on U.S.-Burma relations and the plight of the Rohingya. Could you tell me some of the things that were discussed at the meeting?
Sure. So it was sort of an academic conference at American University, and so some professors and students there wanted to raise awareness about the worsening situation for the Rohingya and then making that connection with what is U.S.-Burma policy and relations, and is it focused on the Rohingya, or should it be more focused on the Rohingya than it currently is? And so myself, Dan Sullivan from United to End Genocide, Benjamin Zawacki, who's formerly of Amnesty International, but is currently a fellow at Harvard University, as well as Dr. Waqaruddin, were able to sort of speak about the issues not just facing the Rohingya, but the implications under international law and the implications for U.S.-Burma relations.
And do you feel the United States government's diplomatic approach to the situation is the correct course of action to kind of quell the turmoil in Myanmar?
For us, the problem is that the U.S. government feels as if diplomacy is the option to go with. And they look at this as sort of like a sideline issue as opposed to an issue so serious that it should dominate U.S.-Burma relations. And so for us, what we would like the U.S. government to do is not consider this sort of just something that we should talk to the Burmese about. We need to take seriously that the Burmese government is part of the perpetrators of the abuses against the Rohingya. And so therefore, we shouldn't have business as usual with the rest of our relationship. So for instance, there was a defense ministers meeting at the beginning of April in Hawaii. And so they didn't cancel that. They didn't discuss the Rohingya situation. And so you have the third highest ranking member of the Burmese military having this huge opportunity as chair of ASEAN to co-host this meeting with the U.S. defense minister, while just a few days before, all of the aid organizations helping Rohingya had to flee because of violence that took place. And, that's a month after MSF was kicked out, and they are the only healthcare provider for more than 700,000 people. And so in a situation like this, we sort of say, we shouldn't go ahead with business as usual. Business as usual should be suspended until the Burmese make progress in addressing the desperate situation that they have created for the Rohingya.
I know you spoke a little bit about this at the conference, but could you tell me, as Myanmar's reformation moves the country away from the junta regimes of the past, could you describe how the post-military regime government is handling policy concerning the Rohingya community and how it compares to the previous military-led government's policies?
So basically, the current government in Burma is carrying out some of the exact same policies that it did under the military regime. And so there's sort of a few big reasons for that. One is it's the exact same people in control in the government. It's just some of them took off their uniforms while others still wear them. And so one of the phrases that we commonly hear in Burma about that change is that it's old wine in new bottles. And so you do see some of the same persecution policies taking place over several decades, and that has not changed. What we have seen that has worsened since this sort of like quasi-civilian transition has taken place is that the Rohingya have been targeted even more than they had before. And for us, that was by design by the government. That was not something that was organic on a local level. A lot of the times I think some of the media confuses the fact that a lot of the perpetrators are civilians themselves with thinking that this is potentially intercommunal violence and don't take into consideration sort of the larger policy issues. So you have government ordinances and directives that say 2-child limits for couples in northern Rakhine State. You have restrictions on marriage, restrictions on movement, restrictions on education. And what we've seen more recently with the violence is this level of impunity, this rounding up and imprisonment of Rohingya males. That we see the denial of humanitarian assistance over the past 2 months, the taking away of access to healthcare. And so all of these things sort of show that the government has increased the level of persecution that it commits against the Rohingya.
Thank you, Ms. Quigley. Did you have any closing sentiments that you wanted to offer our listeners today?
For everybody out there, just, doing everything and anything we can, because we feel as if we are in a situation where we're seeing the precursors to genocide. And none of us want that. And so that is why we feel as if everybody should pressure the U.S. government, pressure the Burmese government to make this a priority in preventing that from happening.
Thank you. Once again, that was Jennifer Quigley, Executive Director for U.S. Campaign for Burma, speaking after the recent conference on U.S.-Burma relations and the plight of the Rohingya in Washington, D.C. on Thursday. This is Voice of Rohingya Radio.
sano haraito Jodi bala legataitu o mera sano haraito komor butar leganore.
Thanks again for listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio, a registered nonprofit news program coming to you from Oregon in the United States of America. I am your host, Zach Taylor. We now turn our attention to allegations of rape and sexual assault made against Myanmar soldiers, according to a document made public this week. An Irrawaddy article said on Thursday that a report to the UN Security Council from Secretary General Ban Ki-moon titled Conflict-Related Sexual Violence addressed the issue of sexual violence in 20 countries around the world, including Burma. The Secretary General for the United Nations called on the government of Myanmar to fully investigate and respond to current and historical human rights violations and abuses, including crimes of sexual violence. Ban Ki-moon urged the government to work to develop a comprehensive protection and service response for survivors of sexual violence with UN support. Burmese women's organizations and campaigners who have long called for allegations of sexual violence by the military to be independently investigated welcomed the general's intervention. The Thailand-based Women's League of Burma, or WLB, in January said in a report it had documented more than 100 cases of soldiers raping women and girls in Burma since 2010. The group welcomed this clear recognition of state failure to deal with past and present military sexual violence in Burma. WLB pointed out that previous government-led investigations into military rape have not only failed to deliver justice, but have led to further humiliation and intimidation of rape survivors and their communities. We are still concerned about how the government would conduct investigations if they agreed to implement the UN Security General's recommendation, the secretary of WLB said. The organization's report noted of the rape allegations that, quote, their widespread and systematic nature indicates a structural pattern and that rape is still being used as an instrument of war and oppression, end quote. It added that allegations of rape by soldiers, which may constitute war crimes, should be independently investigated. Soldiers have been accused of raping girls as young as 7 in Kachin State, as in one case from November 2013, and a 13-year-old girl was allegedly raped by a soldier in January 2014, just as the WLB's report documenting other allegations was published. In other news, Thailand is scrambling to show its efforts in combating their human trafficking problem, as it aims to avoid a downgrade in an influential U.S. State Department annual report that ranks countries on their anti-trafficking efforts. But in a special report published on the 10th of this month, Reuters' examination of that effort exposes flaws in how Thailand defines human trafficking, exemplified by its failure to report the lucrative trafficking of thousands of Rohingya confirmed in Reuters' investigations. In March, Thailand submitted a 78-page report on its trafficking record for 2013 to the State Department. In the report, Thailand includes no Rohingya in its tally of trafficked persons. The distinction between smuggling and trafficking is critical to Thailand's assertion, as smuggling, done with the consent of those involved, differs from trafficking, the business of trapping people by force or deception into labor or prostitution. A 2-part Reuters investigation in 3 countries, based on interviews with human smugglers, human traffickers, and Rohingya who survived boat voyages from Myanmar, showed how the treatment of Rohingya often constituted trafficking. Reporters found that hundreds were held against their will in brutal trafficking camps in the Thai wilderness. Thailand faces an automatic downgrade to Tier 3, the lowest rank in the U.S. government's Trafficking in Persons report. A Tier 3 designation would put the country alongside North Korea and the Central African Republic as the world's worst centers of human trafficking and would expose Thailand to U.S. sanctions. Now for some news from inside the border, as many have called a recent news story from state-run newspaper New Light of Myanmar, government propaganda, as the Immigration and Population Ministry claimed that more than 6,000 Muslim households in Arakan State have agreed to be registered as Bengali in the nationwide census. This is after they were told they could not self-identify their ethnicity. Enumerators conducting the UNFPA census have reportedly passed over any households where the residents insisted on calling themselves Rohingya, effectively leaving out of the census a group numbering in the hundreds of thousands in Arakan State alone. A front-page story in New Light of Myanmar Friday claimed that some Rohingya families had volunteered to be counted as Bengali, quoting an unnamed official from the Immigration and Population Ministry. The newspaper, which did not use the word Rohingya in the article, claimed that, quote, Bengalis, end quote, registered themselves as such in Burma's 1931, 73, and 83 censuses, and that the term should still be applied. Information later surfaced that the supposed 6,000 family figure was the result of one man turning in a self-made tally of his village without the permission of the people unofficially enumerated by him. The man and his family have reportedly gone into hiding after people in the Rohingya community were angered by his actions. A Rohingya activist from Arakan State summarized the sentiments of his community, saying, "We are not Bengali. Bengali refers to those from Bangladesh. We have been living here for a long time." I'd like to thank you again for tuning in today to Voice of Rohingya Radio. As always, you can find all of our broadcasts at youtube.com/VOR Radio, and you can join our Facebook page for more information on past and future programs. I'd like to close today with a quote from the famous American naturalist Henry David Thoreau, who said, "It's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see." Some in the world look at Myanmar for economic interest, and some looking at the news from the country find but another turmoil-stricken, impoverished blip on the globe. Looking at the issue may provide knowledge, but not wisdom, for to see is to understand. If the world could perhaps see the issue, it could align together to stop these atrocities from taking place, and we could not look at Myanmar through a glass darkly, but see the truth of its people's suffering. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, this is Zach Taylor, signing out.